Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Prolific's Innovation Sandbox. I'm your host, Greg Hodgkinson. If you're new to our show, today is the second episode of season 2. So join us here every Thursday, same time. We're hosting different technology experts who are leaders in their fields, and they'll be sharing their passion and what they see being the future of hot technologies like IoT, advanced analytics, cloud, and so much more. Your voice is an important part of the show, so please submit your questions at any time in the live chats, either just to the right or below the video feed. And don't forget to stick around towards the end for that Q&A. Just like last week, we're very fortunate today to have 3 distinguished guests with us in the sandbox. We have Stan Waterhouse. Stan is an accomplished CEO and pioneering business leader with a proven track record of harnessing data for business value. We have Wayne Eckerson. Wayne is an accomplished author and thought leader in the business intelligence and analytics fields. And then lastly, our very own Dr. G, our chief data scientist and head of our advanced analytics practice. Everyone, welcome to the Innovation Sandbox. So Stan, thank you. Stan, we're going to start with you. You've had a distinguished career in the business world. You've also got a very deep interest in data and analytics. I'm not sure whether you would consider it to be a totally neurotic about them, but let's just stick with deep interest. Data and analytics are really important enablers, I think you've said, for many of your business outcomes. So we really want to get a sense for what that's been like for you over the years. I know your work's covered a number of fields. One of the ones you've mentioned that's very interesting is the work you're doing with senior living and the healthcare space. So maybe we can just start there. Could you just tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Sure. And senior living, basically, which is the development of communities for people as they age. And there is kind of a spectrum of needs. So early on in that aging process, people need certain amenities, services. And as people age further, then those services change. It becomes a little bit more intense. So we work with active adults, 60s and 70s, all the way through to folks that have a higher need profile in their 70s, 80s, 90s even. And part of that senior living spectrum includes a healthcare component, which generally people refer to as skilled nursing. It's basically hospital light would be a way to put it. So folks go into hospital, their needs change, they become more stable, then they can move out of hospital into a less focused healthcare environment. But we do provide healthcare products through that segment of the business. So yeah, healthcare is a component part of senior living as well.
Now, so you've spoken about how, again, you've got this enthusiasm for data and analytics, and really you've used that to drive success in the business, and you've been very successful in this business area. How has data and analytics played out in this space? So maybe, I know you spoke especially about how you go about marketing and even on the operations side of things, how those have been crucial to successful business outcomes for you.
Well, I think there's 2 component parts to that. One is the marketing element of it. The second part is the business operational efficiency models. So when we look at healthcare deliverables, when we look at deliverables and development of senior living, we look at how the business is aligned, right? How do things work within it? Everybody talking to one another in the right way. And the second part of that is the operation itself and the efficiency of that operation, where we can provide higher quality care, quality services, and hopefully do it with elimination of any errors in the system, because for obvious reasons, healthcare and errors are not a good combination. From a data standpoint, we make sure we glean a lot of information through that interaction between the provider of services, the caregiver, if you will, the nurse, the docs, whatever, and the patient, so that we can understand the efficacy of those treatments and be able to twist the knobs as we need to. And we can do it in a near-term way, as opposed to having to wait for several days or months, actually, before you get good financial data or other data that describes those interactions historically. The other part is, on a marketing basis, we developed a process by which we would look at our existing resident base. They have a certain profile to them, and we generally and I think we attributed 40 or 50 key pieces of data that would describe that resident, that population. We then took that information and went out into the broader marketplace in a geography that made sense for a community and said, okay, who in that community matches that profile? And so we were able then to really narrowly define prospects within the marketplace that would have a need for that product, have a need.
That was Greg. That was one of the projects that I was fortunate to work with Stan on. And when the title of this sandbox being neurotic, I don't know if that's the right term, but Stan is definitely an executive that drives, really seeks out analytics to support any kind of business decision. And in the prospecting that he was describing, he was managing, I don't know, Stan, you can correct me. I think you were managing maybe $1 billion worth of properties at that time across several geographic areas. And each of those facilities, depending on the age of the facility and the type of services that they provide, it really attracts a totally different type of target market, right? And so sometimes they're relatively near those facilities, but other times they're far more dispersed. As a matter of fact, in some of Stan's facilities, a lot of the decision makers about where senior living, decisions about senior living are actually done by their children, and they're from another state, right? Coming from New York all the way to Texas just for the warmer weather. So Stan is one of those executives that really has always pushed the maximum that you could push in analytics.
And that's so the whole data and analytics angle to that's really interesting. So the prospecting and that kind of exercise of going out and finding the ideal customers for these properties is obviously something that's been going on for a while. But it's the ability to take that to the next level and scale it up. And also, was there kind of a almost real-time element to this? I mean, are you able to, with some of these data points, actually make more real-time decisions on whether somebody is a good match for and how best to serve their needs?
Go ahead, Stan.
Well, from a marketing standpoint, it was more of had a little bit longer time horizon to it because you're taking static population of residents and saying, okay, here's what they look like, right? And you're looking at their affinity groups, you're looking at a whole lot of things about them. So that's kind of static. So you apply that to the marketplace and you'll get a response back. When it comes to the operational side, obviously that stuff is very dynamic.
Absolutely.
And we're looking moment to moment responses to issues so that we can then, like I said, dial the knobs, twist the knobs a little bit to amend the operational model to fit those needs. Because clearly in healthcare, in real estate development, it's a fairly long time horizon. There's peaks and valleys in the cycles, but it's not like tomorrow is much different than today in terms of importance, in terms of something's going to blow up and we got a real problem in Houston. Healthcare is totally different. It can change moment to moment and lives are in the balance at that point.
I guess also carry on, Dr.
I was going to say, really the scale from what I've been fortunate working with Stan on is less about real time in terms of when a decision is making, immediately, but it's more in terms of the scope of your expertise. So Stan has a hospitality background, and he also has a health background. So that really joins together. Both of them have very unique type of analytics, and they join together in senior living. But then Stan has brought that same composite of experience to helping to drive health policies in government agencies. Here in the case of El Paso, there's a big health initiative, and Stan is an active part of that, bringing that kind of expertise to help trying to drive. Stan, so maybe you could kind of describe a little bit about the healthcare initiatives that are being driven here, and maybe more specifically about COVID.
Sure. Over the last several years, we developed a database. We call it the Public Health Intelligence Index. So it's PHI squared, for the geeks out there. And that's a composite of a lot of data that one is based on CMS or Center for Medicare Medicaid Services databases, health insurance databases, surveys. We conducted about 25,000 surveys in El Paso of individuals to really understand the healthcare dynamic out here and the health needs of the population. So the idea is to take that database and be able to be predictive, if you will, to look at the data which informs us about the community's health profile and to do something about it. When COVID came along, it became very clear that our data was very valuable in that process. So when we started looking at COVID infection rates, we began looking at mobility in the community in terms of how people move around the community physically, in terms of contact tracing, where we found out where people were in the past few days before they became positive tested. We found a lot of very interesting information that would then inform, and we're working with the city to take our data and then inform them to help them develop policy to address the issues associated with COVID in the community. So as an example, we looked at and said, okay, well, we've got a mobility issue in El Paso that's greater than other cities within Texas. So we have a lot more movement around the city in terms of percentage population than we do in Austin or Dallas or Houston. So that by the very nature of it creates some problems. We also saw where we began to close restaurants and bars where that changed a little bit. So we knew that it began to have some effectiveness. We also know that like big box retail, restaurants, bars, gyms, and in El Paso, cross-border traffic are the main determinants of, they account for the vast majority of folks that have COVID infections. They participated in one of those circumstances within the very near term. So we were able with great certainty to take all this stuff and be able to sit down with the city and say, okay, here's the reality of the world. That informs how you can then develop policy. Very interesting.
That's critical. Yeah, that's critical. So it's the decisions. It's the decision taken that gets enabled by having that data to hand.
Well, it gives them it gives them hard information to be able to make a decision on it. There's always a political part of the process, but it gives them information that says, here's reality. What you do with it now is to a degree your choice.
Right. So I'm sure it's been interesting to see how IT and data have really attributed to those different examples of success. We probably want to come back to some of those, but what I'd like to do is we're going to bring Wayne into the discussion. Now, Wayne, you've got, there's so many different areas of your expertise in data and analytics that I'd like to dive into. I almost don't know where to start, but I think something that a lot of our audience is grappling with at the moment when it comes to data is the cloud and what public cloud means to data strategy. So what kind of special challenges do you think the cloud brings when it comes to looking after data?
Yeah, that's a great question. The cloud has simply amplified all the issues in data. It's more of everything, more volume, more velocity, more variety of data from more places. So there's a great opportunity in that, but also a lot of complexity as well.
Yeah, and I guess that the notion of just so the cloud's a location for your data, and that doesn't necessarily mean you're sharing it in a way that you weren't in the past, but it definitely opens up a lot more opportunities for data sharing. And as soon as you're sharing data then and putting it out there outside your organization, then the risk of bad quality to data is just amplified. So I guess that's an important part of it as well.
Data sharing, that's a little bit of a tangent from the cloud, but the cloud makes that possible.
Yeah.
Just on the cusp of a real, global data sharing environment, which is really exciting, opens up all kinds of possibilities. But for the most part, 99% of companies are just struggling to share data within their own four walls, right? So moving things to the cloud in many ways makes that easier to create and data environment It's more agile, more flexible, more scalable, more accessible, yet more governed at the same time. But we see a lot of organizations embracing the cloud. Very easy for startups and greenfield type of environments where you just start on the cloud. A little more tricky for organizations that already have built data repositories on premise, where they have operational applications already running on premise. How do you navigate and balance, cloud-based computing with your existing on-premise computing? Because most companies can't, just clean cut from one to the other. As they say, lift and shift in our industry.
Yeah.
Although a lot of companies are doing that as well.
So I've seen you've actually written about this concept, or you've spoken about this concept of what you've called data laggards and the data elite. And I guess this is part of it. So, I mean, some of those companies that have an existing infrastructure, what are the challenges that they're going to have so I guess maybe first let's start off by, what does the data elite look like? What do those guys look like? What are they doing right?
Well, the data elite are organizations that run on data and increasingly run on algorithms. So guys like Dr. G are kind of running the data show there. At least, that what they're putting together is driving a lot of the data infrastructure, right? So if you're running on data and you're running on algorithms, you can begin to automate a lot of internal processes and become more efficient and cost effective, as well as automate a lot of interactions. Not always automate, but sometimes always optimize your interactions with customers and suppliers, right? Because you can anticipate better what they want, what they need, how they'll react to offers that you give them, how you can better provide customer service based on where they are, what products they already have, because you know that, you know who they are before they even come to you, right? In fact, as we were talking about with Stan, you can go to them with services and opportunities because you understand them from a data perspective and know what they'll probably want and like. So
the elite have really gotten to the level where they're unlocking all that value from their data.
Absolutely, yeah. They're and you could say that they're analytics companies masquerading as retailers or manufacturers or financial services firms. Data is at the heart of the way they run their business. It's the heart of we talk all about transformation, right? You can't transform your organization digitally unless you have good data. So the two go hand in hand.
And Dr. G, I guess to a degree, you want every single customer to be in that elite group, because that's really where you come to play and where you're really unlocking all that additional value from their data.
It's curious that Wayne and I have overlapped for, I don't know, geez, Wayne, I think what is it, about almost 15 years now. And we both share an energy for maturity, right? How mature an organization is, and we've overlapped on studies as well as actually building maturity models, right? To try to get a sense of it by very specific targeted areas like business intelligence or analytics. And so when Wayne is talking about the data elite in Prolific's parlance for analytics, we're talking about the disruptor, right? We're talking about those individuals who are actually leveraging analytics to disrupt a marketplace, right? More than a competitive advantage, they're really out to try to establish business transformative type of processes to really, change the game. And so Wayne and I really think a lot in terms of maturity. We're often always considering the journey. Where does a company go from the nascent all the way to the premier?
Now that's so. I guess so we talk about this the elite, or the Dr. G, to use your term, those kind of disruptors. So cloud may be a portion of that, but it sounds like it's not really the core portion of that. A very interesting angle I want to pick up with you, Wayne, is it sounds like, and I'm going to throw another quote at you, which is you've written about today's data pipelines becoming fragile webs of many interconnected elements. And it sounds like that's a core part of the problem, is just you're wanting to operate at this high level of efficiency, but actually your data and the way your data's structured and moved around within your organization is more of this kind of spider web, as opposed to something which is really conducive to getting the best out of your data. So can you give us a sense for what that looks like, and maybe where data ops helps with that problem?
Yeah, so I've been Dr. G and I have been in this space for 30 some odd years, and 60 years collectively, I think.
That's right.
In the good old days, we didn't call them pipelines, but we moved data from source systems into a data warehouse using ETL tools. And, some of those ETL programs could be very complex, but they were basically servicing one application, the data warehouse. Today, with the advent of data scientists and a data lake, which, you're just dumping all kinds of data in and letting people like Dr. G, go and explore the data and then do something with it. There's many, many more applications that people want to put the data to use for or apply the data to. And that gives rise to data pipelines. Now, unlike software development, where you're kind of building a monolithic application, code base, in the data world, you are using multiple different tools and you're flowing data from one node to another node to another node, and then maybe iterating back. And so these workflows get very complex, and they span multiple platforms, multiple tool sets, and servicing multiple types of users and business needs. So that's why data pipelines can get complex. So we're starting to see the rise of, I'd say ETL, on steroids, platforms that can manage that complexity, as well as span different environments on premise to the cloud and so on.
Wayne, your research is spot on, and you're being politically correct when you say, complexity or a complex web of pipelines. I think the other way to say it, from somebody that's in the weeds, it's a mess, and and I just don't know that there's really there. We're learning how to apply rigor, but it's not the technology. It's just that we're just starting to suck up all of this technology quickly and applying it quickly. It's just a mess. Is the word I would put on it. So I really love your complex web of data pipelines. That sounds much better.
Good turn of phrase. There's actually there's two related things I want to expand on with this. So the first is, Wayne, you have also written, and I must say, Wayne, with a lot of your writing, I think you have a very good way of expressing some of these concepts that we all grapple with, and also start applying it into solutions that are very consumable. You've spoken about observability and how that applies to data. And I think that's an important part of the puzzle when it comes to controlling the mess. So making sure that irrespective of the number of tools and pipelines, you have a way of really being able to see and grapple with how the data is moving around and what issues you may have. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so our industry is great at coming up with new fancy words to describe old things, and observability is one of those. It's monitoring, right? And we've done monitoring for decades. There's been two basic markets segments for monitoring. One is IT infrastructure. What are your servers doing? The CPU, the memory, the disk, how are those functioning, right? Because if those break down, everything that they're supporting breaks down. The second market segment has been applications, right? So let's monitor your applications. How are they running, right? But monitor applications, you have to monitor all the infrastructure as well underneath. And now we're starting to see the emergence of another layer, which I call business monitoring, where you're monitoring your metrics. This is kind of an extension of BI, but observability is not quite applied to that yet. But observability and monitoring your applications that the business relies on, which are being powered by these complex pipelines, is really important, because you want to be proactive in detecting any errors before the users and consumers of the application or the data notice. So that's where observability comes in. And with machine learning, you can turbocharge observability tools so that they can actually start to intelligently do root cause analysis and anomaly detection and start to piece things together. Because in a complex IT world, you may have thousands and thousands of alerts and errors, and too much for any individual to really consume and make sense of. So you need a machine intelligence to kind of summarize and consolidate all these alerts and bring them up and say, oh, something's happening over there, you ought to check. Or better yet, the machine fixes it on its own if it's a repeatable type of issue that comes up. So monitoring or observability is just one part of data ops. And data ops is all about achieving the holy grail in our space, which was to deliver things faster, better, cheaper. Because historically, and Michael knows this, we've always done it slower, worse, and it's really expensively, And as a result, the business people hate anybody in IT and anybody doing data-driven applications because we've failed them so poorly. So data ops provides the promise of achieving success with the business. How does it do that? One, it allows you to scale up your development. So instead of one developer building a solution for you, which is not very scalable and not very repeatable usually, you can have teams of people using software development techniques like continuous integration, continuous deployment, to all work on the same code base, which in our world is just not software code, it's also data code, which is why the data scientists are mucking up things and making it really hard, making these pipelines so complex. So team-based development through CI/CD, it's orchestrating, right? Our workflows, as I said earlier, are so complex, so many different nodes and tools. We need some really strong orchestration tools, basically scheduling or job scheduling, right? To kind of automate these pipelines. And probably the most important part is testing. And the software engineering world has done a great job of building tests before they write code. We're just starting to figure out that that's important in our space too. So let's do test-driven development, and then we have something to monitor, right? We can point our monitoring tools to the test results, and they can see if something's going awry before it gets too far downstream. So those
Wayne,
are
I'd like to ask you a question on the DevOps. So to me, it's just like you said, we've been in this industry for way too long. DevOps, you said, provides maybe the promise of being able to control the orchestration of a lot of these data movements or pipelines. And I'm seeing it from another perspective. It's an enabler to do more. And the question I have for you in your research, is it really going to be a technology solution that helps to literally control the volume and govern how these pipelines are built? Or is that still going to remain outside, something that has to be, it requires a constant oversight from governance or people that are interested in managing and controlling that environment. So is it more of a technical solution to control that onslaught, or is it going to remain something outside, something more like a governance?
Yeah, data ops is not just a technology. We're seeing some really interesting, innovative technologies applied to it, but it's people and process. The spirit of data ops is you have a team that's trying to continuously improve, identify bottlenecks, and identify ways, people, process, techniques, technology to unclog those bottlenecks. But at the same time, we're seeing vendors recognize the problem, and there's a huge convergence going on in the industry. All the tools that you need to develop data-driven solutions are being brought together. Data tools are converging with each other. Analytics tools are converging with each other, and data and analytics platforms are converging into Uber platforms, we call UDAP, Unified Data and Analytics Platforms, to take a lot of the complexity or reduce the complexity of building these pipelines and deploying them across any environment that you want. So convergence from a technical perspective is really going to help simplify deployment and scalability, because everything you need, from privacy, security, masking, tokenization, governance, quality will all be built into these platforms. Of course, the problem with all-in-one platform like that, so you could potentially get locked into something that you can't get out of. And that has some downsides. Fortunately, vendors have learned their lesson, and they're making these platforms quite extensible and open so that the lock-in factor is not as big as it used to be.
One more point, if I can. Wayne, you had said that, of course, it's, the projects end up to be longer, more expensive, more of a challenge than they, than originally envisioned. When you said that, though, you weren't really talking about projects that I work on, right? Mine are always on time, on budget. I'm sure that you weren't referring to my personal projects, right?
No, it was the royal you, right?
Well, I want to save some of that conversation with Wayne, I kind of feel we're just scratching the surface in some of these topics. And yeah. I'm sensing a part 2 of this conversation in another episode. However, we will be able to have a little bit more discussion in the Q&A, but I'm getting the signal from my producer. We'll kind of wrap for now, and then we'll jump into Q&A. But I'd stick around. We'll cover some of those questions. So thank you to both you, Wayne, and to Stan. Thanks very much for the great discussion that we've had. Just as a reminder to the audience, we're going to move to taking a few questions. So just submit your questions in the live feed. It'll be just to the bottom or to the right of the video feed, and my producer will hand them over. So this will be the time for covering a little bit more about some of those points. Wayne, what I wanted to ask you is from what you were saying now, just to throw one more curveball into the mix, because we haven't spoken about enough topics. In this big data architecture world, we've got this new concept of streaming. Not that new, it's been around for a little while, but it definitely opens up a lot of different ways of doing things and a lot of potential, but it gives people a lot more to think about because maybe that is something that they weren't really considering anywhere in the architecture previously, but streaming opens up a whole new way of doing things and I guess distributing data. So do you want to talk a little bit about streaming? We've got a little bit of time in Q&A, so.
Sure. So the way we've always moved data in the past, typically into a repository, we call the data warehouse, was in batch jobs that would happen overnight or on the weekend. And we take all the data from the source systems and then we program it so that it get extracted and moved and then transformed and then loaded into the data warehouse. So what's happening now is that the volume of data is growing so large that sometimes the windows that we have to do those batch jobs is not big enough. So then you need a different technology. So initially companies went to mini batch, right? Instead of taking everything all at once and moving it, we broke it up into like 15-minute increments and loaded it. But even that sometimes is not enough. So hence streaming. From just a pure technical perspective, streaming is a way to circumvent the problems with those batch windows. Now, on the business side, there's two things going on. One, people want to analyze all kinds of different data now, especially machine data coming off of servers in your IT environment, for instance, or social media feeds, or sensors, which are everywhere, right? So we call this machine data, and that data comes in very fast. It's very simple, but there's large volumes. So streaming is a great way to suck that in, and oftentimes now we can analyze that data as it's moving past, and we never even have to store it. The third driver is the fact that business now wants to run in a more agile fashion. They don't want data from yesterday or last week or last month. They want data today, as of this moment. Or they want to run Dr. G's models. They'll tell them what's going to happen tomorrow, right? Based on what happened yesterday. So they want real-time information. And to do real-time, you really need to move data into your decision-making environment much faster, and that's where streaming can also help. So 3 main drivers of streaming. So we're starting to see IT architects realized that they got to build streaming into their architectures. And, the cloud, which we started with, is a great excuse to kind of take all these different issues that have cropped up and reinvent your whole data environment with the most modern technology to support things like streaming from the get-go, data ops from the get-go, elasticity from the get-go. And that's why people are moving to the cloud pretty quickly. No one that I know wants a data center anymore, unless regulators are telling them they need it. So people want to get rid of those mainframes, and they want to push everything to the cloud and start over again.
I did have it was already a question in the Q&A. It's more of a statement around DevOps being new to one of the audience. And I guess it triggers so what I think, so DevOps, it's kind of similar story to DevOps in that a lot of what DevOps isn't necessarily new. I guess the reason we've got a new term for these things, it's the same with observability versus monitoring. We've got a new term for these things because the scale of the problem has just increased so much over the last 5-10 years. As well as the vision that we need to put in place to keep up with that scale of the problem. And I guess just talking about a monitoring solution or just talking about a build and deploy process and just talking about ETL isn't enough. We really do need a new term to describe a new vision. And the reason there's a new vision is it's just the scale of the problem has increased so much.
Yeah, and data ops is definitely a play on DevOps, which took hold in the software engineering field, 15, 20 years ago. And the data field is really that much further behind. So what DevOps did for software engineering, data ops will do for us, which is essentially take us from an artisanal-based development approach to an industrial scale development approach. And we're not going to succeed unless we do that.
Absolutely. All right, gentlemen. I would definitely love to spend more time with you today, but I know we're kind of over on time, so that's all the time we have for this week. So to my guests, Stan and Wayne, thanks for joining us today, and Dr. G. I do kind of, my suspicion, because I know Dr. G is a good friend of both of you, is I kind of think that he set this up just so he could hang out with you guys today on office hours. But it was great spending some time with you, talking through this very interesting area. Stan, I really appreciate the kind of business context and that business sense that you brought into the discussion. And Wayne, obviously you've got a huge amount of experience in the area, so I look forward to future discussions. I will say, just finish off, thanks to the audience. It's been great having you all with us in the sandbox. Do check out, we've got exciting episodes coming up in future. So look at our website, prolifics.com/innovation-sandbox, and stay tuned. So until then, keep well, keep innovating, and we will see you all next time.